Budget 2021 seeks to shield our economy and society through one of the worst crises in living memory. The Government's priorities in guiding the state through the pandemic are protecting the lives of our people and ensuring our economy can weather this storm. The protection of our people is the core of the Department of Justice work, and the record €3 billion allocation for justice in this budget, an increase of 200 million, will help the departments, its agencies and others in the sector in that task. The justice sector has been on the front line throughout 2020, supporting our health colleagues in the battle against COVID-19. I am very grateful to the women and men in frontline agencies such as An Garda Síochána, the Irish Prison Service and the Court Service, the Office of the State Pathologist, Forensic Science Ireland and many others, as well as the staff of my own department. As has been said many times, the difficulties caused by COVID have accelerated the need for us to change and reform our lives. I am pleased that my first budget as Minister for Justice allows us to both protect our people, including the most vulnerable, and at the same time modernise the justice sector. It also allows me to begin work on my priorities as Minister for Justice, to strengthen and reform An Garda Síochána to ensure our communities are safe, to tackle sexual, domestic and gender-based violence, to support victims and reform how vulnerable witnesses are treated as sexual offences are investigated and prosecuted, and to modernise the courts, immigration services, policing and other justice services to make them more efficient and easier to access. In terms of our COVID measures, we must continue to properly fund our frontline workers as they serve the public throughout COVID-19. We must keep them safe as they work to keep us safe. To this end, I have secured 13 million for PPE for An Garda Síochána, 5.7 million for increased PPE, cleaning and healthcare costs for the Irish Prison Service, 5.7 million for the Court Service, including for additional premises to enable socially distanced and safe court sittings, and 0.4 million in additional funding for organisations who are responding to increased service demands from people impacted by domestic abuse during this period. In terms of the modernisation, reform and investment in ICT, as I've said, this is one of my key priorities as Minister, driving the modernisation, the digital agenda across the justice sector to ensure that our services are efficient and, most importantly, accessible. Building on previous investment, new funding of 42 million will lead to a significant payback of improved public service right across the sector. Additional ICT spending in key areas includes an extra 22 million for ICT in Garda, bringing the total to 71.2 million in 2021. A separate specific provision of 7 million for additional mobile devices and related costs under the Garda Mobility Project. This unprecedented level of investment will enable continued investment in existing and new ICT systems, which are critical to the implementation of the measures in the reform plan, a policing service for the future. 8 million will be spent in year one of the courts modernisation programme, almost 4 million of which is for ICT investment, and 5 million for the Justice ICT strategy. This significant development will, among other things, enable me to reform the immigration area, where too many operations are still paper-based, and help speed up the services to the public. In relation to the Garda vote, the total gross allocation to the Garda vote for 2021 is a record 1.952 billion. In addition to the increased funding for COVID and ICT measures mentioned already, the allocation provides for recruitment of up to 620 new Garda recruits and 500 Garda staff. On that basis, there should be 14,700 Gardaí, with a further 300 recruits in training in Templemore by December of next year, a total of 15,000. This allocation also provides for an increase in supervisory ranks at sergeant and inspector level, maintaining the overtime budget of €95 million, 8 million for continued investment in the Garda fleet, in addition to the highest ever investment of approximately 15 million in 2020. 34 million for the capital building and refurbishment programme, including the projects to relocate from Hardcore Square to a new purpose-built building on Military Road. Overall, more Garda recruits and more Garda staff means extra members of the service on the front line and in special units battling organised crime groups and keeping people safe. In relation to the Justice and Equality vote, an increase of 56.1 million or 13.4% brings my department's vote to 474 million. This will be used to improve access to justice, to provide vital supports for those who need them and to provide better service for our customers. With increased funding of over 2 million, bringing their total funding to 44.6 million, the Legal Aid Board will recruit additional staff and enhance delivery of a service across the country. Additional funding of 4.4 million in current expenditure and 10 million in capital funding will be provided to Forensic Science Ireland for 2021. This brings the capital budget to almost €51 million, supporting the construction of FSI's new state-of-the-art laboratory in Backweston and County Kildare. I'm particularly pleased to have secured additional funding also to support the important work of the Criminal Assets Bureau, the Inspector of Prisons, the Probation Service, among others. CAB's budget has been increased to a record €9.96 million, and I know that they are busier than ever, and I am very glad to have been able to provide them with additional funding to further increase their staffing levels. In relation to the prison's vote, the prison will have a current expenditure budget of €358.5 million in 2021 and a capital budget of €36 million, mainly to complete the redevelopment of Limerick Prison. This represents an increase of €15 million in the capital allocation for 2021, providing for the complete modernisation of Limerick Prison as well as eliminating the practice of slopping out. In relation to the court service vote, the gross allocation of €158.8 million for the court service vote includes €8 million for the court's modernisation programme, which I mentioned earlier. The court service has already shown a very impressive innovation and adaptability from the start of the pandemic and in maintaining vital frontline services for those who need them, in particular those most vulnerable victims of domestic violence. This will enable them to further advance the digital agenda to the benefit of the wider justice sector. In relation to the Data Protection Commissioner, I recognise the Data Protection Commissioner's increased responsibility as the lead supervisory authority to the various multinational organisations which have their European headquarters in the state, and I'm pleased to announce an increased allocation of €2 million for additional staff resources. Following increases totalling 15.3 over the past 6 years, this brings the allocation to the Commission over €19 million in 2021. Finally, in relation to an issue that I am prioritising in the Department, domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. This is a scourge on our society. Organisations providing support for victims unfortunately have seen their demand for their services increase during this pandemic. This budget will allow the Government to continue funding providing for such organisations during COVID and to increase our support to them too. The extra support will provide more remote counselling services. It would help keep helplines open, as well as welfare packs and other practical supports for those most vulnerable. Next week I will outline how I intend to reform how vulnerable witnesses are treated as sexual offences are investigated and prosecuted. This plan follows the work done by Tom O'Malley in reviewing protections for such witnesses. I'm glad that €2.7 million has been allocated in Budget 2021 for this work and to support the groups doing invaluable work in the area of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. Finally, I would like to thank my colleagues, Minister Donoghue and Minister McGrath, for their support in this budget. Budget 2021 will protect our country. It will set a course for how we can emerge from this crisis stronger and with an acknowledgement of how we can change it for the better. Thank you.